5. When the Pope made slavery legal, the dumbest decree of 1452, an Italian Dominican friar named Antonio Alberti was walking down a street when he saw some people about to execute a heretic. The scene shocked him, and he turned back around to go home. But just as he did, he saw a group of children begging for money, and seeing that they had no adult supervision, he decided to take them in and raise them himself. He took them to a church where he lived and fed them. But while he was feeding these children, he had the epiphany that it would be better if they were actually enslaved, because then, quote, I could compel them to work. And this is how the most evil law in history came into being. In 1452, Europe was changing. The Renaissance had begun and people were becoming more scientific and less religious. But then there was also the problem of beggars and homeless people, which was a growing issue due to the Black Death killing off so many people. So with not enough workers to support the economy and too many beggars on the streets, the obvious solution seemed to be to make slavery legal again. Yes, slavery had been outlawed in Rome in 390 AD by the Roman Emperor Theodosius I. But considering that the Eastern Roman Empire was still standing, albeit barely, and that the Pope didn't control all of Europe yet, slavery never really went away. In fact, there were hundreds of thousands of slaves in Rome alone in the Middle Ages. But the Catholic Church had become increasingly anti-slavery over the centuries. By the time of the Crusades, the Church had built hospitals to help heal and care for the sick and injured, but also to house orphans and other children who had no one to take care of them. And they believed that taking care of these people was a Christian duty. But after the Black Death killed so many Europeans, there were simply too many poor and homeless people for the Church to take care of. In northern Italy, especially Florence and Venice, trade was booming, but crime and poverty were getting worse. So when Antonio Alberti took those kids in and raised them in 1452, his idea was to simply have them work for him instead of begging. And while that's a good idea, he tried to make it legal. He wrote up a proposal for the Pope, stating that it was better for children to be under the control of someone who could force them to work than to be left out begging on the streets. And amazingly, the Pope agreed. In March of 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued a papal bull, basically a decree, making slavery legal once again throughout all of Christendom. It was called Sublimus Deus, which translates to He who serves God is subject to no one. And in it, Pope Nicholas V stated that those who found homeless children or other beggars could take them in and raise them however they wanted. They could punish them and even sell them, and the children were forbidden from ever leaving their new owner. This essentially made slavery legal once again throughout all of Europe. And Antonio was made the official guardian of all poor children in Rome. He built a schoolhouse for the children he took in and forced them to work for him. And though he gave them food and clothing, he also shackled them to walls and forced them to work until they died. It wasn't long before other nobles in Rome heard about this and realized that they could do the same thing. And after the Pope declared it legal, soon every rich family in Rome had enslaved people. And it didn't end there either. The Pope also extended this decree to non-Europeans, meaning that anyone could enslave anyone outside of Christendom. And in 1454, Pope Nicholas V launched the African slave trade. In an effort to get gold for the Church, he granted the Portuguese the permission to enslave Africans and sell them as property in Europe. And while the transatlantic slave trade would begin later, this was the first time that slavery was legalized and used as a source of labor. And it was all because a Dominican friar didn't want to deal with pesky beggars. While obviously evil, this probably wouldn't have been possible without another very important development. For printing press, Gutenberg in the 40-line Bible. Johannes Gutenberg was born in 1398 to a wealthy merchant family in Germany and became known for creating the first printing press with movable type, which kicked off the printing revolution in Europe. But his biggest contribution may have actually been the creation of the 40-line Bible, which may not sound like a big deal today, but it was hugely influential. Gutenberg printed this Bible between 1450 and 1460 in his home workshop in Mainz, Germany. It is now known as the Gutenberg Bible and was the first major book to be printed in Europe using a printing press. The Bible contained 40 lines per page, hence its name, and was printed in black ink on a high-quality Italian paper made specifically for the Bible. Gutenberg began work on the project after he created the printing press and experimented with movable type. But while creating the press and casting the type was revolutionary, the actual production of the books was not. Gutenberg manually cast each letter by hand and then used a wooden printing press to stamp the page, meaning that the process was still slow and laborious. He still needed to hand copy each page, and the printing press only allowed him to print one side of the page at a time. He likely only printed about 180 copies of the Bible over the next decade, and while not many were sold, the few that were changed the world forever. See, Gutenberg didn't invent the printing press from nothing. He combined existing technologies from China, Korea, and Germany to create the first modern printing press. But while the technology existed elsewhere, the Gutenberg press was different in two ways. First, Gutenberg was the first person to use movable type made of metal instead of wood, which made it much easier to arrange and rearrange letters. And second, the press itself could be reused multiple times and applied pressure to the paper using a screw, which was more efficient than previous presses that used a lever. But the real reason that the printing press was so revolutionary is that it allowed for books to be produced quickly and cheaply, meaning that more people could read and write. This had a huge effect on Europe. Books could now be produced quickly and cheaply, meaning that more people could own them, and therefore more people could learn how to read and write. This started the Protestant Reformation and led to the scientific revolution. People could now spread ideas across Europe much faster and challenge the Catholic Church. And the printing press was eventually used to spread revolutionary ideas during the French Revolution and American Revolution. But what if someone else invented the printing press first? 3. If Leonardo da Vinci hadn't painted The Last Supper. Leonardo da Vinci was a painter, scientist, inventor, and all-around genius. And he created the Mona Lisa and The Last Supper, arguably two of the greatest paintings in the world. But what if he hadn't painted The Last Supper? Well, first of all, he might have finished the sphere as a horse monument. After winning a competition to design a bronze horse monument for the Republic of Florence, Da Vinci spent 16 years working on it. However, Florence got tired of waiting for it, and he was eventually executed. So maybe the world would remember him for his sculpture instead of painting. But what if he had painted The Last Supper, but he'd done it sooner? Well, the famous painting of Jesus and his disciples at the Last Supper was commissioned by a wealthy man named Ludovico Sforza, and he asked Da Vinci to paint it after he'd already begun the Mona Lisa. But Da Vinci was slow to begin, and it wasn't until 8 years later that he finally started work on it. See, Da Vinci was a perfectionist, and he spent hours planning his paintings before putting brush to canvas. He studied human anatomy, perspective, and lighting, and would constantly change his plans. This meant that The Last Supper took 4 years to finish and was unveiled in 1498. But what if Da Vinci had painted it sooner? Well, that brings us to the invention of the printing press. See, The Last Supper was painted between 1495 and 1498, right around the time that Johannes Gutenberg was inventing the printing press. And while Da Vinci had nothing to do with the invention, the printing press would end up having a huge impact on art. The printing press allowed artists to mass-produce their work, which meant that more people could see it and they could make money selling prints of their artwork. It also meant that artists could experiment with new styles and techniques because they could easily reproduce them. But what if Da Vinci had painted The Last Supper earlier, say in 1490? Well, he would have painted it before the invention of the printing press, meaning that his work would have been even more influential. The Last Supper was one of the first paintings to use linear perspective, and it revolutionized painting. Other artists copied it and tried to improve upon it, but they couldn't do so because they didn't have the printing press yet. And this was a huge blow to the Renaissance, because the printing press would become one of the most important inventions in history, allowing for the rapid spread of ideas and information. It also helped to kickstart the Protestant Reformation and the scientific revolution. So while The Last Supper is one of the most famous paintings in the world, it probably wouldn't be if Da Vinci had painted it sooner. And now you know why. Thanks for watching.